And I'm singing just for you, covered in sequins.
On this channel, and in general, we care about words. Semantics is actually a really important thing. If you want to communicate effectively with people, you have to agree on the meaning of words. Otherwise, trouser press, ladder, Pekingese, dachshund. And I've mostly been attacking this problem, this lack of communication that exists, by trying to explain to and browbeat what passes for the modern left, or what you might call a social justice warrior, into using more accessible language, to avoid using their redefinitions of terms, to use common plain English. And that's clearly an uphill struggle. And it's not even in the kind of rarefied atmosphere of academia that this takes place. It also takes place on the street. Take, for example, the current trend of defund the police. You say that to an ordinary person, they hear remove all money from the police department and abolish it, which obviously strikes notes of alarm in most people. But I'm going to try and take a different tack here and explain to normal people what many, but not all, unfortunately, of these activists mean when they use these terms. And this is a kind of shot and chaser. There will be a second video after this one of my normie Facebook feed and the kinds of things that people are saying there that social justice warrior types will react badly to. But it acts as a really good demonstration of how they're failing to communicate. I wasn't going to talk much more about current events because they've just gotten too depressing, and there's been too many difficult conversations where people are talking past each other. But I guess that kind of feeds into what I'm saying here, because I'm not an unintelligent chap. I have been left-wing the vast and overwhelming majority of my life to one degree or another. You know, I'm a writer and an author. I understand language and meaning and the importance of language and meaning and semantics and semiotics and all the rest of it. But I only really just had a revelatory understanding moment about one particular term, and that term is systemic racism. Now, even though I was aware of the differences in meaning and so on, and I just didn't grasp it at all. And the trick to understanding it is that it's not actually racism. Now, if you're anything like me, when you hear the term systemic racism, that brings to mind a system that is geared, even designed, even intended to be racist. One in which people of other races, whatever that other race might be, from the dominant majority or minority, that they are stripped of their rights, that they are deliberately or endemically treated different by society, all of that stuff. You think of something like apartheid or segregation, you know, where it's a legal instrument of the state, of the apparatus of the state, to be deliberately and willfully bigoted, and for people to have it, you know, directly out for, to be deliberately cracking down on and deliberately oppressing people who are other minorities. That's not what systemic racism is. And like I say, to understand it, you have to understand that it's not actually racism. At least this is the way I've understood it best. I've had many different explanations from different people. This is the one that clicked. So systemic racism is an emergent property of a system of governance, for example, or assumptions in society or technology or medicine, that isn't overtly prejudiced or racist, but which nonetheless has a greater effect on minority ethnic groups. So, let's take Britain as an example, where white people, whatever that might mean, are the majority. and black and minority ethnic is a minority. Take immigration rules. If we tighten up immigration rules, that's not going to have as much of an effect upon white people as it will upon black and minority ethnic people. There's a variety of reasons for this. Immigration is moving to a points-based system, which will be based on education, income, various other factors. So even though we're leaving the EU, the amount of people who could potentially be immigrants to the UK from Europe are still going to be majority white. Anyone from outside the first world, the developed world, the Western white-dominated world, trying to come into the UK will find various barriers in place. They might be subject to more scrutiny because of their ethnicity, but that's really because of other factors in the background. They're less likely to have as much money, for example. The education systems in a lot of African and other non-first world nations aren't necessarily as good, so you might not have as good or as recognised qualifications if you come from there. This is just some of the things. Nothing in that immigration policy is intended to say keep people out because of their race. But the effect, the emergent effect of those rules will disproportionately affect black and minority ethnic people because of other factors. So it's not actually racist. The policy isn't overtly, we don't want black and brown people moving here, we don't want Muslims moving here, whatever. That's just the effect. This gets even more complicated when you consider that the true motivations of some people in government or whatever else may be to keep those people out. That drove some of the Brexit issue, for example, because they were worried about non-white immigrants coming from the EU. Never mind, that was bullshit. Their motivations might be that, but the point is that the policy, the idea, for a lot of people, even the majority of people, is not racially motivated, but the emergent effect of the policy is. So when they talk about systemic racism in medicine, for example, that can be just that most of the subjects of tests and so on for drugs might be white in white-dominated countries, or the baselines that we take might be differentiated by race. Medicine is one of the very few places in which race actually matters, because it's at the extreme, it's at the cutting edge of our capabilities. So these are arenas in which we have to take these things into account. Transplants, for example, are less likely to take if your race is different to the person who's donating, or vice versa. So when someone says systemic racism, they don't mean racism. They mean that the way that the system is set up at the moment doesn't serve that particular community that well. So that's the way to understand it. When someone says systemic racism, cross out racism and think, okay, how do our policies and assumptions affect different communities? That's the way to understand it. Because it's terrible communication, because mentioning racism instantly makes people defensive, gives them the wrong idea, gets their hackles up, and there is no actual racism to point at in terms of policy in a lot of these cases. It only emerges as the result of all the different moving parts affecting different people in different ways and different communities in different ways. Horribly complicated, isn't it? I don't want to spend too long on this. If there are other terms like this you want me to try and decipher and translate into normie, let me know in the comments and I'll do a follow-up video on that. But there is one other thing that I really want to address, and that is this concept of privilege. They're using the term wrong, but this is another case in which they've redefined a word. Normal people, when they hear privilege, they think of someone rich or powerful, or most properly, when you describe someone as having privilege, it means they have de jure privilege in law. So again, the examples of apartheid and segregation meant that white people did have more rights. They were privileged over people of colour. These were genuine incidents of privilege. That's not what they mean when they say privilege. Again, it's a terrible term that communicates entirely the wrong message and makes people defensive and puts their hackles up. When they accuse you of having privilege, what they're actually saying is that they lack fairness and equality and advantage. Or they might be arguing on behalf of someone else and saying that this person, wherever, lacks advantage, lacks equality. Because if you are, for sake of argument, a cisgender, heterosexual, white male in our society, you are the baseline that we all expect everyone to be treated the same way as. That line, there are exceptions, let's not make it too complicated though, but that line running through our law and everything else, that's how everyone should be treated, right? It's not privileged, it's not underprivileged. That, for a normal citizen, that's roughly where we would want everybody to be treated. What they're saying is that they are below that level. So the better way to say that would be black people are disadvantaged in our society for various reasons. Or gay people are disadvantaged in our society for various reasons. Or transgender people are disadvantaged in our society for various reasons. That would be the way to phrase it, to argue that we should be made equal, our rights should be made equal to everyone else, that we should be raised up to your level. And phrasing it that way round encourages compassion and empathy. It makes an argument for equality that most people can get behind. That's the good way of phrasing it. So when you hear someone say, "You have white privilege," turn it around in your head and understand it that what they're actually arguing is that black people or other minorities have disadvantage. Underprivileged is a way that it has been put, but both privilege and underprivilege are misdefinitions. So just if you read it as them saying people are disadvantaged, that's the way you need to understand. You need to flip it around in your head and understand it in that way. Then you'll be a bit less defensive. It shouldn't be your job. It should be their job to communicate to you in a more effective way, but they either can't or won't. So I'm trying a different tack. Are they? That's a whole separate argument. That's a whole separate raft of things to discuss. I think yes, but I would say it's due to class and class stereotypes being conflated with race. That's where I'd say the problem is. But that's outside the scope of this video as well. Alright, follow-up video coming in a little bit. If there's any other terms you want me to try and understand on your behalf, drop them in the comments. I'll see what I can do, and I'll fight my natural inclination to turn this into an Ambrose Bierce Devil's Dictionary, which is very tempting to do at all times. Follow-up video coming along in a minute, showing in real terms on social media, in my normie feed on Facebook, just how these ideas are failing to be communicated. Zang.
This is the lie, don't come back. This is the end of nations' borders. These are the